Alright team, today we're going to be using 2 types of honey and making 5 different recipes. It's always important to check the back of the label and make sure it comes from a local honey producer.
This is what you juice the lemons on.
Oh, so you have anything to catch the seeds?
Whenever you pour it, it's supposed to catch them.
Oh.
Yeah, so it has like a little spout.
So as we get started, I just want to do a quick shout out for my cousin Tess for joining me in this video.
Okay, let's try this one. It's pretty strong. I feel like this would be better for like cooking with than like just drinking.
That's good. I think that'll be better in the drink.
I think so too. Yep.
Since we're making this meal in a kitchen, I am going ahead and dissolving the honey into the water on a stove. When I didn't have that, a lot of times we would just shake it in a bottle to dissolve the honey. And we decided to also use fresh lemons instead of the packaged lemon juice that you can get in bottles.
Make sure you clean them before you slice them because I don't like lemon in my juice, like my drinks whenever
Like the chunks.
Yeah.
Like the pulp and stuff.
Yeah, and when you're in public, they usually just have them in a container like not covered, not the cleanest in my opinion.
True. I'm looking for some.
Everyone likes a different tartness of lemonade, so we decided to go with exactly 1 cup of lemons. That took us about 5 different lemons to squeeze. Depending on the type of lemons, you might need more or less depending on their juiciness. We went ahead and poured our mixture into a pitcher so that it could cool for the next hour while we made everything. A few strawberries that we had in the refrigerator along with our leftover lemons were chopped up as a garnish for once our lemonade is cooled. I think blueberries would also be a good recommendation.
The first slurp. Yeah, definitely fine. Like, I feel like the water would dilute it. Well, should lemonade, should we add a little bit more honey?
I think so. Because I can't fully taste that.
Yeah. We can even put like a dab of that other honey.
Yeah.
Since the lighter honey has such a delicate flavor, we decided to add a little bit of the darker honey for a little burst of flavor. Little squirt here, and it would be good to go.
Oh yeah, I like that better. I think it still needs like some ice, Like it's still a little tart, but as far as like tasting the honey,
Yeah.
right? Way better.
Since we really liked the blend of the 2 honeys from the last dish, we decided to go ahead and use them both along with a really light olive oil. My brilliant cousin Tess decided we should use a jar instead of a bowl to mix our ingredients. That way once we've mixed all of our seasoning with our oil, we can shake it and it would all be mixed evenly. Along with allowing dogs to walk in and out of the kitchen while we were cooking, we didn't really measure this, we just kind of went with it. So feel free to mix any of the seasonings or the amounts of honey to reach the flavor that you think is delicious. There's no wrong way to do this. The type of vinegar you choose to use in a vinaigrette really makes it stand out. We decided to use a balsamic because the people who we were feeding really enjoy balsamic, but another option that you could do is an apple cider vinegar because that also tastes delicious too. The amount of salt and pepper, we somewhat measured it, but go to taste. Another thing that we thought about using that I was looking for in the cabinet is a sweet vinegar. We didn't end up adding any of this, but it's a little bottle that I'll show you later in the video.
And so we're gonna put this one into the flour, you're good. And then we're gonna put this one as like a sugar glaze. Yeah.
So the first step, and I will say it did take us 2 tries, is to activate the yeast. We used milk to start activating the yeast, which means that we needed to warm it up. In other recipes, I usually use just water with a little bit of sugar, But because there is lactose in milk, you can mix the yeast into a warm milk and it should activate that way. It did take us 2 tries because some of the yeast was old and wouldn't activate. Next step was to separate eggs, and I'm curious how many of you all can separate the yolk from the egg white. I'm curious in the comments below if that's something that you can easily do, or like Tess, did it take you a couple tries to get that white to separate? Tips from home ec back in junior high is to always mix the wet ingredients and then to add in the dry whenever you're making a bread. So once we got all of the wet mixed together, Tess started measuring out and adding in slowly the flour as I mixed it together to form a dough. I'm actually really impressed that these rolls became so delicious because we totally messed up the recipe. Once we mixed most of the flour in with the wet ingredients, we totally remembered that we had forgotten to add in the yeast and the milk. So we had to go back making sure that the yeast was starting to grow by little bubbles forming at the top, and then had to add it into the flour after we were mainly done. But as you can see, once we kneaded it together, the dough actually turned out really great. It was rising, so the yeast was working, and it was really smooth and elastic.
Alright, so we're gonna make each of these sticks.
Yeah.
Okay.
We added the sugar.
Yep.
The butter.
Yep.
The honey.
Yep.
Large egg white. Additional honey if wanted.
I'm definitely not gonna try this. Are you gonna try this?
Why not? Just put a raw egg in it. I'll just try it. I don't care. I've never made love not that. It's very sugary. That's the grain. Right?
Yeah, so it needs more.
Yeah. I'm rolling. Do you not eat raw cookie dough, baby?
Cool.
We made sure that all of the cauliflower wings were going to be the same size so that would bake consistently. Then we dunked them into a batter and then into the panko. I really liked making these cauliflower wings because we could use a lot of things in the kitchen that we just needed to use up. For example, we used Italian breadcrumbs for some and then panko for others. But as long as they were seasoned well, I don't see why it'd be such a big deal. We popped them in the oven to make sure that we gave them a good crisp before we covered them in the spicy sauce.
Some ruckus in the kitchen. Get that on camera.
Here's our ingredients. Let's see.
Which one, right? We got the
Which
darker.
Which one do we want?
Mm-hmm. That one has a strong flavor, right?
That one's good. Let's try this one. I want to crossbreed some with someone.
Yep, yep. Good job.
That's so much honey on here.
Thanks for cookies, which would be better.
See that one like. I have to say this one right here. This one wins.
Yeah. All right.
The live one.
Alright, so same thing for those of you who didn't go to home ec. Mix your dry ingredients separately in one bowl, and then your wet ingredients in the other bowl, and then you pour the dry into the wet. It seems like a really basic concept and that it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but I promise you once you start baking more in the kitchen, it will make a really big difference. So pour it in, mix, pour it in, mix. It will make your cookies and any other breads that you ever make taste so much better. While Tess is finishing up mixing those cookies, I went ahead and started mixing up our sweet spicy sauce to go on our cauliflower wings. We decided to use the dark honey for the cauliflower wings because we really wanted the flavor to stand out with other spices that we're going to use. Since I had the sticky finger, I had to go ahead and clean off all of our utensils, but it's a small price to pay and delicious. Alright, for this next clip, I just had to make it in slow motion because look at how much sriracha this recipe called for. It was crazy! I know it's supposed to be mixed with ketchup and honey, but that was just a crazy amount of sriracha, so we'll see.
It smells good.
It like sneaks up on you.
I don't eat huge spice. That's like
Pretty more honey. Maybe so, yeah. Go for it. Yep.
Check out this spread. We got the garnishes with the lemonade, the salad, the rolls, the cauliflower wings. We got a warm cookie coming out. And the adults also opened a bottle of mead, which is fermented honey. So instead of using grapes to make wine, we use the sugar from the honey to produce a honey wine or mead.
to foreign test for this lovely honey-inspired meal.
And all the work that went into it. So much love and love.
To conclude, some of you might have noticed that there was no meat products used in this meal. This is a vegetarian family, so we hope we snuck it by you that we could have a delicious multi-course meal without any meat products. But feel free to make the cauliflower wings with your meat of choice.